What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. So last week, I went through NFL free agency and recent moves that were made by certain NFL teams, and we're going to be talking about more of that today, as well as some NBA, and I'll get into a few specifics about teams and some slight stories about the NFL draft to come at the end of April. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. And again, this is, subject to change just because I am recording this on a Monday morning, episode dropping today, Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And we have a lot to discuss today, especially about the NFL free agency period because, well, technically 2 nights ago, as of this released video, we're going to get right into it talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I have been one to be very critical of the Cincinnati Bengals. I have been critical of them realistically ever since they signed Joe Burrow and drafted Joe Burrow. I've been critical of them because they have always been notorious for being a cheap organization, not taking care of their players or retaining great talent on the roster to propel themselves to otherworldly contenders in the NFL. And this is why this past weekend, as of Sunday evening, actually Sunday night, the Cincinnati Bengals reached an agreement with wide receivers T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase, signing both of them to long-term deals. And honestly, this is probably the most shocking news of this weekend because, like I said, the Cincinnati Bengals have always been notoriously cheap. They've been cheap with Andy Dalton and his teams. They were cheap with Carson Palmer and his teams. They were cheap before that, and they were cheap after that. The Cincinnati Bengals ownership group has just been notoriously cheap. They never retained any of their star athletes for long periods of time. They just don't like spending that kind of money. And meanwhile, you got teams like Philadelphia that will break the bank for anybody, including Saquon Barkley, which we just saw this past year result in a Super Bowl title. So this past weekend, we got 2 massive contract extensions for the Cincinnati Bengals wide receivers. And it's amazing to me that they actually took T. Higgins and extended him after weeks ago franchise tagging him. I believe it was actually last week or almost 2 weeks ago that they actually put him on the franchise tag because they refused to give him a long-term deal. But that's exactly what has happened. We have Ja'Marr Chase getting a 4-year deal worth $161 million. That includes $112 million guaranteed. And we got T. Higgins, who agreed to a 4-year extension worth $115 million that is guaranteed for the first 2 years of his contract there. So this is honestly a big surprise to me because, again, the Bengals are just notoriously cheap and never retain their star athletes. Now, here's a weird little situation. So you're going to pay all this money on offense, which I think they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done this because I didn't even necessarily believe they were going to do this anyway. But they're going to more than likely let their best defensive player, Trey Hendrickson, walk and seek a trade partner or sign somewhere else. So let me get this straight. You're going to pay both your receivers, you're paying your quarterback, and your defense, which was atrociously bad last year. Your best player, Trey Hendrickson, led the NFL in sacks, and you're going to let that guy walk as well. Very interesting. But again, I'm not going to say it's a totally bad move to sign T. Higgins to a long-term deal. Everybody knows that Ja'Marr Chase deserved that deal. Everybody and their mother knows how good Ja'Marr Chase is. He's right up there with him and Justin Jefferson. It's a very short list of the elite NFL wide receivers in this current day and age. So I had a feeling that Ja'Marr Chase would have been signed and needed to get signed Because if they didn't sign either of these guys, Joe Burrow probably would have opted out playing for the Cincinnati Bengals and more than likely would have demanded released or traded from the Cincinnati organization. Even months ago before the Super Bowl, we had Joe Burrow that was live on ESPN First Take with Stephen A. Smith, Marley Karam, and Shannon Sharp. He was talking about how much he needed those guys on the team, how much he needed those guys on the roster. Because, and here's the thing, when you have a number one wide receiver, it's always best if you have a number two that has number one wide receiver capable talent. I think of the time when Pittsburgh had Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster. When you look at that dynamic, Juju Smith-Schuster was not a number one wide receiver. He was a great number two, which opened up everything for Antonio Brown. I think that's why Antonio Brown was also so successful in Pittsburgh, was because you have another threat in Juju who you can't double team AB because that just leaves one-on-one for Juju. And you can't double team Juju because you're just leaving Antonio Brown on an island against a subpar cornerback. But it's always important in the NFL to have that dynamic duo at wide receiver. At least in my opinion, you need a dynamic duo at wide receiver. You need someone that can take pressure off your number one option, which is why I think that this is such a great move for Cincinnati. Because if you keep Jamar Chase there, obviously he's a problem on his own, and he would put up stats no matter what. I mean, we just saw him win the Triple Crown last year. When you keep T. Higgins on the field, now you can't double Jamar Chase. You can't, because T. Higgins is that good of a player, not number one caliber, not at the level of Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but pretty close to being a number one viable option in the NFL that requires immediate attention from defensive backs and defensive personnel. So when you look at this is the perfect, situation that could have happened for Cincinnati, at least from an offensive standpoint. Now, their defense is going to probably be absolutely atrocious next year. It would not shock me if it's again a bottom 5 unit in the NFL. And you're without Trey Hendrickson now, more than likely at least going to be without Trey Hendrickson. I guess since they signed T. Higgins, is it possible that Trey Hendrickson would come back on the franchise tag for one more year possibly? I don't know, but we're going to find out. So over this past weekend, Sunday night, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins signed long-term extensions to stay with the Cincinnati Bengals for the foreseeable future. And again, I think this is only going to further benefit Joe Burrow. One, you're going to keep him happy, and two, he has everything he needs from an offensive standpoint to put up numbers and to put his team in a good position to possibly, in the future, probably won't happen this upcoming year, but in the future, make another Super Bowl run. Okay, now I'm going to talk about something that a lot of analysts are, I think, overreacting to. So as we all know, Sam Darnold recently signed a big contract, a $100 million contract with the Seattle Seahawks. He had a career resurgence with the Minnesota Vikings. He had a career resurgence and was in discussion for the MVP up to the end of the season when he absolutely fizzled out and played poorly against the Rams. He played poorly against the Eagles. He just played poorly towards the back end of the season, especially against Detroit, where the number one seed was on the line. But again, I guess it didn't matter because Philadelphia beat the brakes off of everybody. But when you look at the dynamic of Sam Darnold as a quarterback, I don't understand necessarily the hype surrounding him going to Seattle, just because in my opinion, he's not that great of a quarterback. He had a great season, but I attribute that a lot to Kevin O'Connell, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, who is one of the best offensive masterminds upcoming in the NFL. I would put Kevin O'Connell up there with a Sean McVay of the world, with a Kyle Shanahan of the world, Andy Reid, as far as play calling for the offensive side of the football. Is it possible that Sam Darnold was a product of Kevin O'Connell? I think it's quite possible, and I think it's more than probable. Because if you look at Sam Darnold's entire career up to this point, up till last year, now I'm not going to take anything away from him because he still had to make all the throws. He still had to read the defenses. He still had to hit his targets, and he did that last year. And he's reaping the benefit because he got extended. Well, didn't get extended, but he got signed to a $100 million contract with the Seattle Seahawks. But my biggest issue with this is it because of him or is it because of not Mike McDaniel, Kevin O'Connell at Minnesota? I think that's an important dynamic that people need to talk about. So Seattle moves off of Geno Smith, sending him to the Raiders. In comes Sam Darnold, but now he only has Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he has Cooper Kupp now, an old, brittle Cooper Kupp. I don't think that that's a better wide receiver tandem than it was with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. Obviously, Tyler Lockett was released by Seattle, and DK was traded to Pittsburgh. I don't necessarily believe this is the most ideal situation Sam Darnold's even walking into. He has good running backs in Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, an okay offensive line, and then, again, Noah Fant at tight end, who's not otherworldly, but he's okay. And you have Jackson Smith and Jigba and an old, brittle Cooper Kupp. So I don't necessarily believe he's going to put up the same kind of season or statistics that he did with Minnesota this past year. And I'm of the firm believers that he's an average quarterback. Me personally, I would take Geno Smith over Sam Darnold because I've watched Sam Darnold play for years. He was overhyped coming out of college, in my opinion. Again, at the time, I thought he would have been good, but again, getting drafted to the New York Jets is like a death sentence. They do not handle quarterback well, and they do not handle their entire organization as a whole well. They don't hold it all together so well. And they do next to nothing for their development for their quarterbacks. We saw that with Geno Smith early on in his career, and we saw that with Sam Darnold, and we saw that with Zach Wilson. We see that with all the quarterbacks that go to the New York Jets, including Aaron Rodgers. Even though he played okay on the back end of the season last year, it still didn't result in wins. It was still subpar play. And again, I'm one of the firm believers that Aaron Rodgers is kind of washed, but looking at it going forward, is Seattle going to be a legit contender for the Super Bowl in the NFC? Well, you still got the Commanders, you got Philly, you got the Rams, who are going to be very good. You got Detroit, you still got the Vikings. I don't necessarily believe Seattle is going to be otherworldly in the NFC. I don't think they're Super Bowl contenders. I really don't. Maybe in 2 years, give them this year's draft and next year's draft, maybe it's a possibility. But again, the hype surrounding Sam Darnold going to Seattle, I get that and I'll support him on this. Like, he played phenomenal last year, was an MVP candidate, and he earned his money. And it showed with that big contract with Seattle. But going forward, is it really the best move for Seattle? Do they really have the team that can support him for possibly a Super Bowl run in the future? I don't believe so. I think the defense is okay. I like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I like Cooper Kupp. I would like him a little bit more if he wasn't so injury prone all the time. But again, he's up in age and he's been in the league a while. But I just don't see the Seattle Seahawks as Super Bowl contenders. I've watched Sam Darnold play before. He's an average, below average quarterback. I mean, I would take, even though I'm critical of Dak Prescott, I would take Dak Prescott over Sam Darnold in a heartbeat. It's just how it is. It's just how I see it. I don't think Sam Darnold is the type of quarterback to elevate a franchise to next level status, to being able to compete for Super Bowls. So everybody being hyped up about Sam Darnold going to Seattle, I would seriously tell everybody to pump the brakes a little bit. Look at what he's walking into. An okay defense, an average offensive line, He does have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet at running back, so that's a start. Jackson Smith and Jigba, and an old Cooper Kupp and a Noah Fant at tight end. Again, I think it's pretty average. Now, I'm not saying that Jackson Smith and Jigba he's no scrub. That's what I'm trying to say. He's no scrub, and to the back end of last season, he did ball out a little bit. But again, he hasn't proven that he's a number one wide receiver in the NFL yet. He hasn't proven that yet because DK Metcalf has been getting all the love in Seattle, and especially Tyler Lockett, who was there before DK Metcalf. So when you look at that dynamic, we don't really truly know how good Jackson Smith and Jigba truly is for Sam Darnold. So we're going to find out. I'm willing to believe that, Jackson Smith and Jigba coming out of Ohio State, he was otherworldly. Everybody thought he was more talented than a lot of wide receivers that came through the Ohio State program. Now, obviously, all that's put to bed ever since Jeremiah Smith and his outstanding freshman year at Ohio State this past year, resulting in a natty. But overall, I just don't see this move for Seattle being wise, and I don't see how Seattle's going to reap the benefit of this $100 million contract. Again, I still congratulate Sam Darnold for, a great season he put on last year, but I think, again, he was more of a product of his circumstances than his actual talent suggests. When you look at Kevin O'Connell and what he's able to do from an offensive standpoint, J.J. McCarthy was looked at, he was going to be the starter until he got injured in the preseason. So, we'll see how that dynamic works. Again, Minnesota doesn't even have a quarterback right now of note that's going to be a surefire starter. We're going to find out. But going forward, when it comes to Sam Darnold in Seattle, I think Sam Darnold was more of a product of Kevin O'Connell's play calling and scheming and play design, more so than his actual talent suggests. All right, now I'm going to transition to a little bit about Shedeur Sanders in the NFL draft. So I've been seeing a lot of things that a lot of mock drafts have Shedeur Sanders dropping low into the first round and then possibly out of the first round. And again, he's facing a lot of scrutiny because I guess it's the arrogance that he comes off. It's just his persona that, he's making teams aware of. I think partially this is because of the Deion factor. I think a lot of people just don't like his father. But again, I've said that Shedeur Sanders I came full circle on. But when you look at this, I've already said that he might be the third most talented quarterback in this draft, and that's not really, anything to brag home about when it comes to the bottom end of this draft. I do think that, now I said that Shedeur and Cam Ward are the two best prospects in this quarterback draft, but after watching the combine, I'm willing to flip-flop Shedeur Sanders and my third favorite quarterback, who's now my second, and that's Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. Again, the cockiness and the arrogance, we've seen this from quarterbacks before. We've seen it from guys like Baker Mayfield, who, honestly, he's a good quarterback and deserved every bit of that contract he got from Tampa. I think he was made for Tampa. When you're drafted into Cleveland, it's just a death sentence. It's just like how I was talking about the New York Jets. When you look at everything that goes on in Cleveland, in New York, those are just dumpster fire franchises that can't get it right. They'd never get. I like the coach in Cleveland, but other than that, I like the players that they have, but their quarterback situation, it's been a carousel since 2002. It's been a carousel at quarterback since the early 2000s when I wasn't even old enough to speak and to read. That's how bad the Cleveland quarterback situation has been for the better part of 2 decades. And I'm 25. Cleveland has made the playoffs maybe 2 or 3 times in my lifetime and only 1 playoff win in that time. And I've witnessed my team win 2 Super Bowls in that time. Again, we're going to talk about Pittsburgh in a little bit. But as far as going back to Shedeur Sanders, the cockiness and the arrogance, honestly, it's turning a lot of NFL teams off, I believe. And again, I said that he's a talented quarterback, but overall, when you compare talent to what you're supposed to be projected, honestly, if Shedeur Sanders was in the class of J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, he is the fifth most talented quarterback in that draft class by a country mile, and it's not even close to the other four that I mentioned. Caleb Williams, let's go through them. Caleb Williams, showed flashes, but also very raw. And again, another death sentence organization, the Chicago Bears, who never get anything right. But Caleb Williams still showed flashes of the greatness that we saw at USC when he was in college. Jaden Daniels, Offensive Rookie of the Year, an uprising star at quarterback who nearly made the Super Bowl in his rookie year, getting to the NFC Championship game, doing things we've never seen a rookie quarterback come in and do, and completely change the face of the Washington Commanders, completely change the trajectory of that organization. And based off their signings and their drafting, they're in win now mode. That's how good Jaden Daniels is. Then you got Bo Nix, another promising candidate. He got to the playoffs, obviously didn't win against the Buffalo Bills, but everything that I've seen out of Bo Nix and Sean Payton is telling me that situation is going to work, and it's going to work well. We got Drake May. Now, he has little to nothing to work with in New England, but he showed flashes, he showed upside, and I think he's a better candidate than Shedeur Sanders. And then you look at J.J. McCarthy. I think Shedeur's closer to J.J. McCarthy, but again, J.J. McCarthy, before he got injured, I think was on pace to be the starter that Sam Darnold would have been his backup throughout the year. That's how good J.J. McCarthy was, at least in camp and in the preseason of last year before he got injured. So when you look at Shedeur Sanders as a top prospect, in the draft itself, yes, I guess you would consider him that. But again, I think he's talented. I don't necessarily see everything that the analyst sees. Yeah, he's more poised in the pocket, but again, he was thrown to Jimmy Horn and Travis Hunter, but he did not have an offensive line, so I won't pin pretty much all those sacks that he's taken over the past 2 years on him. But that's what's happening right now is I guess his arrogance, his cockiness, and just his demeanor is turning off a lot of NFL franchises, and it's possible that cockiness and arrogance that he's showing to NFL scouts and GMs and coaches is going to possibly drop him out of the first round. All right, now I'm going to go briefly over the NBA right now. I'm going to go over right now the East. This is what the Eastern Conference looks like. Obviously, there are games tonight. I'm recording this on a Monday morning, and there are games tonight, so obviously this is going to flip-flop. But as of Monday, March 17th at 9 a.m., this is what the Eastern Conference looks like. You have Cleveland at the 1 seed, Boston at 2, New York Knicks at 3, the Bucks at 4, the Pacers at 5, the Pistons at 6. Then you got, in the play-in games, you got Atlanta Hawks, Orlando Magic, Miami Heat, and Chicago Bulls. Now going to the Western Conference, at the number 1 seed, you got Oklahoma City Thunder, followed by the Houston Rockets, Denver Nuggets, Memphis Grizzlies, the Lakers, the Warriors, and then the play-in games, you got the Timberwolves, the Clippers, the Kings, and the Mavericks. And there's one team I do want to talk about, which is very fascinating to me, is the Golden State Warriors. So as of right now, when I'm recording this, they're 39-28. And they're 6th in the West. People thought that the Jimmy Butler trade was not really going to work out too well for the Warriors. Well, again, I know tonight as I'm recording, they play the Nuggets. But the Golden State Warriors are 14-1 since Jimmy Butler arrived. That's fascinating. And it just goes to show Jimmy Butler has been right every single situation he has been in and left. I think he's one of the most undervalued players in the NBA. I mean, he plays with toughness. He plays with grit. He's just an overall great player to have on your team. If you look at that time he spent in with the 76ers. The 76ers were very close to making deep playoff runs. I mean, it took an immaculate shot from Kawhi Leonard from the Raptors years ago, to send the Philadelphia 76ers home early. Otherwise, that Philly team very well could have beat that Milwaukee team that Toronto ended up beating that year, and then eventually capturing their NBA championship later that year with Kawhi Leonard. He leaves and goes to Miami, and he completely changes that team dynamic because ever since Wade retired, you had LeBron leave and Bosh retired. That team wasn't the same. They weren't making noise in the East like they usually were. But again, they had some good pieces on that team already. Then they added Jimmy Butler. They made it to the NBA championship in the bubble, which again, people are going to discount the bubble. You still got to go out there and play the game. So I think it's still a legit championship. And it was against unprecedented times during COVID when everything was uncertain and you didn't know what to do. So Jimmy Butler gets to the finals twice. Once as the 8th seed in the East. Again, going through number 1 Milwaukee. And this was, I believe, 2 years ago. Jimmy Butler put the Miami Heat on his back and carried this franchise for, a decent amount of time over the past 5 years. And now that he's on the Golden State Warriors, I know Jimmy Butler, he wanted out of Miami. I do not remember the exact reasons why, but again, the Warriors are being the beneficiary of this because they're 14-1 since Jimmy Butler got to Golden State. And again, they could be 15-1 or 14-2 by the time this episode releases on Tuesday morning. But again, 14 wins to only 2 losses possibly, or 15 wins to 1 loss since Butler got here. That's impressive. And I think that it's possible that this team, they may have a dark horse chance to go to the NBA Finals. Do I think it's going to happen? No, but I think it's a fantastic story to see. The Warriors weren't nothing to write home about. They still got Steph Curry, who, by the way, hit 4,000 threes in his career, in his milestone, which is amazing to see. And the next closest is James Harden, I believe, and he's like 900 three-pointers away from being able to tie Steph Curry. So I don't even think Steph Curry's three-point record will ever be touched and ever be broken. But if you look at the Warriors, I think this is one team that in the playoffs you wouldn't want to play. I think that the Warriors can make noise, especially if Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry continue to play like this together. I would watch out for the 6th-seeded Warriors. Again, at the point of recording this, 14-1 since the Jimmy Butler trade, since Butler's been on the team, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, we're going to finish up with my favorite team today. We're going to talk about the Steelers again. So, obviously, I was so hyped that we traded for DK Metcalf because I don't see Pittsburgh spend money on offense literally any year. I never see Pittsburgh spend money on offense. I see them spend it on defense all the time. And again, where does it get Pittsburgh? A winning record, not good enough to compete for a Super Bowl, not bad enough to get a top draft pick. Again, NFL purgatory. That's what Pittsburgh is in and has been in for the better part of 5 to 6 years, even the last 2 years of Big Ben's career. This is what Pittsburgh has been. And they have no quarterback plan. Obviously, Justin Fields signed a $40 million deal or whatever it was with the New York Jets, so he's gone. Russell Wilson is still a free agent. We didn't bring him back. I thought the DK Metcalf trade would have enticed Pittsburgh to re-sign Russell Wilson because of that dynamic they shared in Seattle when they looked like one of the top 5 quarterback wide receiver duos in the NFL at that point in time. So I thought the writing was on the wall to bring Russ back, but he's not back on roster. The only quarterback move Pittsburgh has made is bringing back Mason Rudolph from the Titans. What is Pittsburgh doing? I really don't know. I know they're banking on Aaron Rodgers to sign with them. at this point, I don't know what to say about Pittsburgh anymore. If Aaron Rodgers decides to sign with the Giants or Minnesota and completely diss Pittsburgh, again, by the time this video drops, maybe he signed with Pittsburgh, maybe he signed somewhere else. But again, looking at the dynamic of this, Pittsburgh is so tone deaf to offense. They are so inept when it comes to the quarterback position. Who drafts wide receivers better than anybody in the NFL? Pittsburgh. They're never not going to have weapons to throw the ball to. It matters about the quarterback situation. And again, I think this is the same problem that Cleveland has. They're looking to build a team and then find the quarterback to plug in to that spot with the team that's already built, rather than find the quarterback and then build the team around him accordingly. It's the same problem that the Jets have. It's the same problem that Cleveland has. And now it's apparent it's the same problem that Pittsburgh has. I do not know their game plan. I do not know what they're doing. If they're completely banking on Aaron Rodgers to sign, well, Aaron Rodgers is a nuthead. He's a nutcase, and nobody knows what he's going to be doing. And you bring back Mason Rudolph, who didn't play terrible in Pittsburgh, but he didn't do anything to write home about. Again, when I went to a Steeler game a couple years ago with my good friend, shout out to you, Nate, but we went to this is when the Lions were a dumpster fire still. This was like the first year of Dan Campbell's tenure in Detroit. Pittsburgh was playing with Mason Rudolph, and it was Pittsburgh and the Lions at Heinz Field at that point in time, and the game ended in a 16-16 tie, I believe. And that was the first Steeler game I've been to up to that point in like 5 years. And what a way to end it. What a way to go back and see a masterclass. Mason Rudolph against an injury-riddled Lions team and a dumpster fire of an organization at that point in time, Lions team, and it ended in a tie. I've seen this song and dance with Mason Rudolph before. As a Steeler fan, I'm not here for it. I'm really not. And the fact that we did give DK Metcalf 5 years, $155 million, or whatever it was for an injury-riddled wide receiver, and one who has a temper just as or worse than George Pickens already is, I honestly don't know what Pittsburgh is doing. At this point in time, if you're banking on Aaron Rodgers, I don't even know what to say to that, because I think he's a washed quarterback. I don't think he's good anymore. I think he's a subpar quarterback now at this point in his career. I really do. Unless Pittsburgh plans to give up a haul and move up in the draft to get a Cam Ward, Shedeur, or Jackson Dart, unless they plan on doing that, I don't know what Pittsburgh's ultimate goal is at quarterback. Maybe tank for Arch Manning next year. But again, Pittsburgh is more than likely going to win. Here's what Pittsburgh's going to do. This is what they're going to do. You heard it from me first. They're going to go 9-8 next year. They're going to sneak into a wild card game, get bounced, and everybody's going to pretend like nothing's wrong, just like usual. Pittsburgh has no plan going forward. And if there is, it's not made known to anybody, because this is absolutely puzzling. You don't go after Darnold. You don't bring Russ back. You don't sign Fields. You don't get Aaron Rodgers just yet. You offered Aaron Rodgers, but he hasn't signed yet. And now you bring back Mason Rudolph, who really didn't do much when he was in Pittsburgh the first time around. Solid plan, Pittsburgh. That's what we're left with as Steeler fans. Two divas at wide receiver who are going to be demanding the football and nobody to get the ball to them. And that's going to wrap it up this week on the Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day, and I thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ every day for being able to do this, and I'm having such a blast doing this. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lico. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out.